On April 14, 1943, at the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific in Pearl Harbor, the codebreakers worked diligently. A pencil scratched across a sheet as intercepted Japanese naval signals converted into readable English. The dispatch came from the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, outlining the inspection route for Admiral Yamamoto. It included a precise schedule with specific arrival moments at frontline outposts. The journey would begin at 0600 hours Tokyo time on April 18th from Rabaul. It would reach Balale Airfield by 0800 hours Tokyo time. The transport involved 2 Type 1 medium bombers, protected by an escort of 60 fighters. Technical Sergeant Harold Fudena, a Nisei interpreter in the Military Intelligence Service, carefully verified his rendering against the raw cipher. The meticulous nature of Japanese military strategy had yielded remarkable specifics: pinpoint timings, particular plane models, and exact paths. Commander William Goggins, who oversaw FRUPAC activities, quickly grasped the dispatch's importance. In moments, the deciphered information reached Commander Edwin Layton, the Pacific Fleet's intelligence chief. Layton's gaze sharpened as he pondered the consequences. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, would soon enter the striking distance of U.S. aircraft for a brief window. Unbeknownst to them, this one intercepted signal would spark the boldest aerial ambush in flying annals. The war in the Pacific had shown U.S. troops that Japanese officers weren't merely tacticians, they embodied icons. Eliminate the icon, and you demoralize a whole armada. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stood for far more than fleet command. Educated at Harvard, seasoned by global journeys, and fond of poker, Yamamoto comprehended America more deeply than any other Japanese leader. His cautions regarding U.S. manufacturing might have gone unheeded. His hesitation to fight the United States had been dismissed. But once engaged, he had executed Pearl Harbor with clockwork accuracy, secured initial wins in Pacific clashes, and almost clinched a crushing blow at Midway until U.S. code experts shifted the momentum. The Lockheed P-38G Lightning rested on the apron at Fighter Strip No. 2, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Its twin Allison V-1710 8991 engines could propel the plane to 414 F at 25,000 feet. The dual booms trailing the power plants linked via a 52-foot horizontal tail. The central nacelle accommodated the pilot and weapons, 4 50-caliber Browning A&M machine guns, plus a 20mm Hispano M2 cannon packed in the nose, avoiding the alignment issues of wing guns. Equipped with 2 165-gallon drop tanks alongside the 300-gallon onboard reserves, the Lightning boasted a combat reach beyond 450 miles. No other U.S. fighter in the Pacific matched that endurance. Major John William Mitchell lingered in the ops bunker, reviewing meteorological data and intel briefs. As leader of the 339th Fighter Squadron in the 347th Fighter Group, Mitchell had amassed more than 2,000 hours aloft, spanning from elementary trainers to cutting-edge pursuits. His brain tackled the operational challenge with the exactness of an autopilot. The straight-line span from Guadalcanal to the ambush site measured 435 miles. Yet a straight path would expose them to enemy-occupied atolls loaded with radar arrays and spotter networks. The circuitous path, veering wide into the ocean before veering northward, extended the outbound leg by 165 miles. Overall outbound, 600 miles. Inbound, 400 miles. Grand total, 1,000 miles, leaving scant fuel buffer for maybe 7 minutes of dogfighting at maximum output. The figures left no room for leniency. A standard P-38G carried 300 gallons in primary tanks and 60 in auxiliaries. The pair of 165-gallon externals brought another 330 gallons. Full load, 690 gallons. At economical speeds, each engine burned roughly 50 gallons hourly near sea level, rising with height and throttle. Optimal flight duration hovered around 5 hours and 45 minutes. The operation demanded at least 4 hours and 30 minutes, granting ideal plotting and no hitches. Factoring in evasion turns and possible winds, the safety margin vanished. Captain Thomas George Lanner, Jr. had memorized the operation's blueprint down to the finest point. Offspring of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Lanier, Sr., a honored World War I pilot who aided General Billy Mitchell's team, the junior Lanier inherited sharp combat acumen and savvy connections that would define his career. Standing 6 feet tall with sturdy shoulders and the poise of an innate commander, he had notched 5 air kills, albeit a few contested. His bold piloting and flair for publicity garnered fans and critics alike in the unit. At age 27, Lanier viewed the Yamamoto assignment as his path to renown and post-war influence. First, Lieutenant Rex Theodore Barber embodied a contrasting model of the American fighter pilot. Fighter aviator from a rural Oregon background, hailing from Culver and a student of engineering at Oregon State College, prior to joining the service in September 1940, Barber executed his missions with precise mechanics and understated skill. While Lanier chased renown, Barber prioritized effectiveness. His verified kills in the air stemmed from strategic placement and precise marksmanship, not flashy maneuvers. By age 25, he possessed an exceptional knack for mentally mapping out the spatial dynamics of dogfights. His systematic method in battling from the skies mirrored his technical education. Each move weighed deliberately, each hazard evaluated, each burst fired with intent. On board the Mitsubishi G4M1 Type 1 bomber, bearing the number 323 at Lakanai Airfield in Rabaul, Admiral Yamamoto went over the maintenance checklist alongside his aides. Known to the Americans as the Betty, this bomber embodied both Japanese innovation and concessions. It boasted an impressive range of 2,150 miles, attained by skimping on defensive plating and omitting self-sealing tanks for fuel. Top velocity reached 265 km at 99.85 feet, with a cruising pace of 200 mph. Such weaknesses had led Japanese pilots to dub it Hamaki, cigar, or the Type 1 lighter, a dark nod to how readily it ignited under fire. Yet for this outing, 6 A6M3 Model 32 Zeros from the 204th Air Group were assigned as guardians. At 59, Yamamoto endured as Japan's sharpest mind in grand strategy. Originally named Isoroku Takano before his adoption into the Yamamoto lineage, he measured 5 feet 3 inches, yet projected the poise befitting a warrior's air. His left hand carried scars from the clash at Tsushima Strait on May 27, 1905, where Russian fragments claimed his index and middle fingers during an explosion in the gun turret of the armored cruiser Nishin. That wound never dulled his enthusiasm for inkbrush art, his prowess in card games like poker, or his knack for inspiring loyalty via raw charisma. While studying at Harvard University between 1919 and 1921, he traveled America by thumb, touring car assembly lines in Detroit, petroleum processing sites in Texas, and plane production facilities in California. Those journeys solidified his belief that conflict with the United States spelled certain loss, a view he voiced in his well-known remark about a 6-month rampage preceding sure downfall. Success for the American scheme hinged on keeping signals intel under strict wraps. Should Japanese fleet leaders sense their ciphers were breached, they might scrub Yamamoto's trip or shift its timing. The code-breaking crew at Station Hypo, now rebranded Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, had cracked JN-25 codes well ahead of the Midway engagement. Their prowess in deciphering Japanese fleet communications had grown refined, evolving from fragmented breaks to almost full message reconstructions. Still, every unraveled dispatch carried the danger of exposing U.S. strengths. Greenlighting the strike based on the Yamamoto intercept demanded consent from Admiral Chester Nimitz, head of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral William Bull Halsey, overseeing the South Pacific, Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher, leading air operations in the Solomons, and finally, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who reportedly issued the blunt directive, "Get Yamamoto." Coordinating the ambush blueprint involved several officers in tandem. Marine Major John Mitchell, as Operations Chief for Commander Aircraft Solomons, drafted the preliminary route, factoring in fuel burn and course markers. Mitcher scrutinized and rejected it, deeming the speed projections and timelines mismatched to the P-38's traits. Starting over, he reworked the calculations afresh, collaborating with his flyers overnight to craft a strategy that boosted odds of success while curbing exposure. The ultimate path included 5 meticulously plotted segments, each plotted to evade Japanese detection systems, adjusting for crosswinds and compass variances. Intel assessments pointed to several advantages for the operation. The timing, April 18th, coincided precisely with the anniversary of the Doolittle raid over Tokyo, lending poignant weight. Projections for weather promised ideal setups, patchy clouds, and clear sightlines. Above all, the Japanese showed no signs of code penetration awareness. Monitoring of radio exchanges revealed routine activity, absent any hints of heightened safeguards. If surprise held, it would strike without warning. The accompanying Zeros posed a tough hurdle that dominated much of the prep work. The Mitsubishi A6M3 Model 32 offered better agility than the P38 in mid- and low-level flight. It hit a peak of 336 mph at 19,685 feet, ascended at 300 feet per minute, and could outturn any U.S. plane in a circle under 1,000 feet. These edges came from extreme lightning, with an unloaded mass of just 3,180 pounds against the P-38's 12,780 pounds. Lacking any armor shielding, the fighter's design offered scant protection for its pilot, relying solely on a solitary 55mm slab of armored glass. It lacked self-sealing fuel tanks, leaving it exposed to fire-starting rounds. The airframe's integrity was engineered to the barest essentials. During tight, low-altitude dogfights under 20,000 feet, the Zero could overwhelm a P-38. Yet in swift plunging assaults that leveraged greater armament and durability, the Lightning claimed clear superiority. Throughout his deployment in the Solomons, Lieutenant Besby Frank Holmes had scrutinized Zero engagement strategies. Japanese aviators usually stuck to tight protective setups, hovering 1,000 to 1,500 feet higher and a bit astern of the bombers in paired V formations of 3 planes each. Official guidelines directed these Guardians to clash right away with incoming foes, allowing the bombers to press onward, banking on velocity and onboard defenses for safety. American spies, however, had spotted a recurring flaw. When ambushed from unforeseen directions, especially from underneath and to the rear, Japanese groups frequently responded with delay. Success hinged on pulling off total surprise, even while crossing 600 meters of exposed sea under full sunlight. On April 17, 1943, the pre-mission rundown kicked off at 2,000 hours inside the crowded ops shelter. Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher, leading Air Solomons, spoke directly to the gathered flyers. Famous for championing carrier-based flying and steering USS Hornet through the Doolittle strike just a year prior, Mitcher grasped the ops gravity. 18 P-38s were slated for the effort. 4 planes, tagged as the strike team, would go straight for the bombers. 12 more would handle overhead defense against the expected counter from Kahili Field's 750 fighters. 2 extras stood ready as backups for any breakdowns. The strike team flyers included Captain Lanfear, Lieutenant Barber, Lieutenant Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond K. Hine. The backups were Lieutenants James McClanahan and Joe Moore. Mitcher's routing scheme blended genius with hard-earned know-how from countless ocean crossings. First stretch, magnetic course 200 km for 55 minutes at 30 to 50 feet elevation, spanning 183 miles. Second, 290 for 27 minutes, totaling 89 miles. Third, 300 km for 38 minutes, reaching 125 miles. Fourth, 330 for 16 minutes, covering 52 miles. Fifth, 290 for 21 minutes, spanning 70 miles en route to combat height. Every segment was plotted to dodge Japanese watchpoints on New Georgia, Vella La Vella, and the Treasury Islands, while adjusting for predicted gusts. There was zero room for navigational slip-ups. Holding a 1-degree error across that span could displace them miles away, with fuel too low to hunt the objective. The gear issued to pilots underscored the ops' grim stakes. Mae West, vests for ditching at sea, despite slim odds and shark-ridden waves. Bush kits with purification pills, survival food, hooks and line, plus rudimentary meds for crashes over Bougainville. Every man packed a Colt 1911 A145 pistol plus spare clips, aware that getting caught spelled instant doom. As the conflict dragged on, Japanese handling of shot-down U.S. airmen grew ever more savage. Accounts from freed captives detailed decapitations, vivisections, sans painkillers, and verified instances of flesh-eating. The flyers knew fuel exhaustion over the drink likely brought drowning or shark attacks. Breakdowns above enemy soil promised horrors beyond that. Lieutenant Colonel Luther S. Moore, handling forecasts, double-checked the atmospheric intel. Ground-level breezes from the southeast at 8 knots, at 5,000 feet southerly at 15 knots, at 10,000 feet southwesterly at 22 knots. Solomon weather was infamously fickle. A squall brewing along the path could wreck everything. Surprise head currents alone might strand the P-38s short on gas for home. The forecaster pegged a 70% shot at decent skies, yet all new island temps could flip in moments. Massive thunderheads might erupt from blue in under 60 minutes. Comms blackout held firm until enemy contact. The P-38's SCR-274N setups were dialed to 6710 kilocycles, a band Japanese ears probably ignored, though any chatter could tip off foes. Mitscher would guide the whole group via visual plotting, magnetic needle, speed gauge, timepiece, and sheer brainpower. Nothing like radio fixes for bearings, no visible cues across the vast ocean ripples, save for islands to skirt. The prowess of a single navigator would decide if those 18 planes located a target or disappeared into the vast Pacific. Lieutenant Julius Jack Jacobson checked his aircraft's weapons one final time. The 4 Browning A&M 250 caliber machine guns each carried 500 rounds of M2 ball, M1 incendiary, and M2 armor-piercing ammunition in linked belts. Rate of fire, 750 to 850 rounds per minute per gun. The 20mm Hispano M2 cannon carried 150 rounds of high explosive and armor-piercing shells. The concentrated firepower in the P-38's nose created a convergence zone of destruction that could soar through a bomber's wing spar in seconds. But ammunition consumption at maximum rate meant less than 37 seconds of firing time for the machine guns and less than 12 seconds for the cannon. Every burst had to count. In the pre-dawn darkness of April 18th, ground crews performed final preparations under the supervision of their crew chiefs. Master Sergeant Leo B. Godfrey supervised the arming crews, ensuring every round was properly seated and every belt correctly aligned. Fuel tanks topped off to absolute capacity with 100-octane aviation gasoline. Internal tanks filled to 360 grain, drop tanks verified at 160 grain each. Ammunition belts loaded with the prescribed mixture of ball, armor-piercing, and incendiary rounds in a 4:1 ratio. Drop tank attachments checked and rechecked. A mechanical failure in a single shackle could abort an aircraft's participation, or worse, cause a tank to hang up and create fatal drag. Oil levels verified, hydraulic pressures checked, control surfaces inspected for full range of motion. The Japanese Navy's 11th Air Fleet at Rabaul operated under strict protocols for high-ranking officer transport. Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka, commander of the Southeast Area Fleet and Yamamoto's subordinate, had argued against the inspection tour. American fighter activity had increased dramatically around Bougainville, following the Japanese evacuation of Guadalcanal in February. Intelligence reports suggested the Americans had nearly 200 fighters operating from Guadalcanal, the Russell Islands, and other forward bases. But Yamamoto insisted on personally congratulating the pilots of Operation IGO, the recent Japanese air offensive that claimed dramatically inflated victories against American shipping. Reports of 1 cruiser, 2 destroyers, and 25 transports sunk, when actual losses were 1 destroyer, 1 corvette, 1 tanker, and 2 cargo ships. Chief Petty Officer Hiroshi Hayashi supervised the preparation of Yamamoto's aircraft at Lakunai Airfield. Betty Bomber, tail number 323 from the 705th Air Group, had been selected for its excellent maintenance record and reliable engines. The aircraft had completed 47 combat missions without significant mechanical failure. Additional fuel tanks had been installed in the bomb bay to ensure adequate reserves. The Admiral seat had been positioned on the left side behind the pilot, providing the best view for aerial observation. A special mounting had been installed for Yamamoto's personal katana sword, a family heirloom dating to the 16th century Momoyama period. The escort fighters came from the 204th Air Group, an elite unit with extensive combat experience over the Solomons. The 6 pilots selected averaged over 500 combat hours each. Among them was Petty Officer First Class Shoi Sugita, who would later become one of Japan's leading aces with over 70 victories before his death in April 1945. Also flying escort was Petty Officer First Class Kenji Yanaga, a 100-mission veteran who felt deeply honored to protect the combined fleet commander. They had faced American P-38s, P-39s, P-40s, and F-4F Wildcats in numerous engagements. The Lightning's speed advantage diminished below 15,000 ft due to compressibility effects and the Zero's superior power-to-weight ratio at low altitudes. Its turning radius at low altitude exceeded the Zero's by a factor of 2. In a low-altitude turning engagement, the Zero pilots believed they would hold every advantage except firepower and armor protection. At 07:25 hours local time, 0525 Tokyo time on April 18th, Mitchell's P-38s began taking off from Fighter Strip No. 2 at Henderson Field. The takeoff sequence had been carefully orchestrated to minimize time and fuel consumption. Mitchell led the procession, followed by his flight of 3, then Lanier's killer flight, then the cover flights. Lieutenant Mullanahan's aircraft suffered a blown tire on takeoff roll. The P-38 skidding off the runway in a cloud of coral dust and tearing off the right wheel. He was unheard, but eliminated from the mission. Lieutenant Joe Moore's fuel transfer pump failed during climb-out, preventing him from accessing his drop tank fuel, forcing him to return immediately. 16 P-38s continued the mission, 2 fewer than planned. The margin for error, already razor-thin, had diminished further. Mitchell led the formation at exactly 30 to 50 ft above the water to avoid Japanese radar detection. Salt spray coated the windcreens within minutes, requiring frequent clearing. The aviators maintained strict radio blackout, relying solely on visual cues to hold their formation. Every flyer grappled individually with boredom and exhaustion. After 2 hours and 5 minutes in tight echelon, skimming just above the waves, they perpetually fine-tuned their throttles for positioning while eyeing gauges and steering clear of vertigo. Beneath the aircraft, the Pacific's waves surged in perpetual rhythm, their steady motion almost mesmerizing. A few aviators afterward described battling sleepiness, employing tricks like smacking their cheeks or belting out tunes to stay sharp. Sunlight poured through the transparent cockpits, baking the interiors into sweltering spaces even with the rushing air. Lieutenant Roger J. Ames, positioned in the protective element, watched his fuel usage with mounting worry. The resistance from his auxiliary tanks surpassed estimates, likely from faulty mounting or production inconsistencies. At this burn rate, he'd arrive back with barely 5 minutes' worth of spare fuel. The equation was straightforward, yet alarming. Squander too much en route outward, and return would prove impossible. Hoard excessively, and combat agility might suffer from insufficient thrust. Each aviator executed tiny tweaks to prop pitch and power levers, weighing operational demands against odds of making it through. The Allison power plants hummed consistently, their harmonized roar turning trance-like across the duration. Precisely at 0600 Tokyo time, or 0800 locally, Yamamoto's pair of bombers lifted off from Rabaul, right on cue. The Admiral donned his formal white attire, adorned with honors like the Order of the Chrysanthemum and the Order of the Golden Kite, aiming to inspire frontline forces with the might of the Imperial Navy. Accounts suggest his demeanor was grave. A number of aides later recounted that he appeared to sense foreboding about the journey. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, Yamamoto's top aide and confidant, rode in Betty Bomber 326 alongside other personnel. The group ascended to 6,500 feet, with Guardians slotting into 2 trios. Skies were clear, dotted with fluffy cumulus at 4,000 to 5,000 feet, offering sporadic cover. Warrant Officer Kenji Yanaga, escorting in Zero-Tail 3081, swept the heavens and followed ingrained patrol routes honed over years of drills. 3 years in battle had sharpened his senses to uncanny precision. He distinguished plane models at ranges where peers discerned mere dots. His side sight picked up the faintest shifts amid cloudscapes. Still, that dawn, his focus stayed mainly on exact echelon keeping. The Rabaul to Bougainville leg had passed routinely countless times before. U.S. interceptors hadn't pushed this far northward in force. Routine mishaps loomed larger as threats than hostile encounters. At Aero 934 local, Mitchell's group hit the last waypoint bang on time. They'd been aloft 2 hours and 9 minutes, navigating purely by estimation across featureless seas. Mitchell cross-checked his custom-tuned Elgin timepiece with his plotted spot. Assuming accurate wind estimates and course bearings, a northwest veer now would lead to the rendezvous. Any slip in drift assessment or directional fix, and the objective would vanish. He dipped his wings to cue the pivot, sending all 16 P-38s wheeling together toward Bougainville. The synchronization was uncanny. They led the projected clash by precisely 1 minute, having traversed 410 miles of barren water using just magnetic needle, timer, and velocity readout. Lieutenant Douglas S. Canning, slotted as Mitchell's immediate escort in the second slot, was first to detect the quarry. Bogies at 11 o'clock high up, he radioed at 0934, shattering the comms hush initially. Distance hovered near 5 miles, height gap about 6,000 feet. 8 planes in flawless array, precisely as anticipated. A rush of excitement laced with wonder hit Mitchell. They'd located the classic pinpoint in the vast Pacific expanse. A duo of Betty bombers stepped in loose formation, flanked by 6 Zeros divided into pairs of 3, oblivious to the 16 Lightnings surging upward from astern and below. Mitchell instantly commanded the externals released. Ditch those tanks, every group, time to nail them. The 165-gallon externals plunged seaward as the P-38s cast off their weighty drag. Power plants surged to combat maximum, yielding 175 horses apiece. The fighters sped past 300 miles per hour, ascending at a peak steady climb of 2,800 feet each minute. The strike team would launch the assault as Mitchell guided the guard element upward to counter any reinforcements from Kahili. Captain Lanfear observed the Zero guards stirring into action. They'd caught sight of the inbound P-38s and were releasing their ventral tanks, breaking away to clash. The Zero doctrine emphasized defending the bombers by blocking incoming attackers. Lanier quickly devised a tactical choice that sparked years of debate afterward. Rather than pressing on toward the bombers alongside Barber, he wheeled around to confront the plunging Zeros directly. He later explained his logic as neutralizing the fighter escorts to give Barber an unobstructed path for his strike. Detractors, however, accused him of chasing personal glory, preferring straightforward kills against fighters instead of the main objective. Lieutenant Barber stuck to his trajectory toward the bombers, which were now plunging frantically toward the jungle cover below. The front, Betty had tilted sharply into a power dive, its pilot striving to skim the treetops, where the P-38's velocity edge would lessen and the dense foliage offered concealment. Barber angled his Lightning into a 45-degree descent, his airspeed gauge surging beyond 400 millipues. The gap narrowed swiftly, 2,000 yards, then 2,500 dropping to 1,000. From 500 yards out, Barber unleashed everything, sending 4 torrents of 50-caliber rounds and 20mm shells slamming into the bomber's right engine and wing assembly. The result hit immediately and devastatingly. Flames erupted in orange bursts from the Betty's right engine as the wing beams snapped under the focused barrage. The plane lurched wildly rightward, spinning helplessly. Barber yanked up sharply to dodge a crash, his P-38 straining against the heavy G-loads, catching a final view of the Betty's body vanishing into the treetops amid a wake of fire and wreckage. A dark plume of smoke rose from the crash site, 1 bomber eliminated. But did it hold Yamamoto? Barber couldn't tell as he scanned for the other. Holmes and Hine had trailed Barber at first, but lost contact amid the fierce turns. Holmes then picked up the second Betty, skimming low over the sea, speeding southward parallel to the Bougainville shore at full throttle. Vice Admiral Ugaki's flyer had picked an alternate getaway, heading for the waves instead of the woods in hopes the ocean's gleam would block low-level assaults. Holmes banked into firing stance, yet his approach speed was too high. He let loose a prolonged salvo that crippled the Betty's right engine, creating a white streak of spilling fuel and oil, but he overshot without landing a knockout blow. Barber locked onto the second bomber right after Holmes's run. The Betty hovered just 50 feet above the swells, its wounded engine belching fumes. Barber set up for a lead-angle shot, aiming 30 degrees ahead to match its pace. His opening volley stitched across the surface, kicking up fountains of water before raking the bomber's body. Chunks of outer skin tore free, some pinging off Barber's P-38 with sharp clangs. The left engine on the Betty ignited. The pilot tried for a gentle splashdown, but the plane smashed into the sea at more than 100 manataries. It shattered on contact, the body ripping away from the wings. At the same time, Lanier tangled with the escort Zeros in a brutal upward scissoring dance. His P-38's greater velocity let him hold on to momentum, while the nimbler Zeros banked on their agility. Lanier insisted he downed 1-0 in the clash, recounting how he flipped upside down and blasted its wing roots, triggering a mid-air blast. Yet Japanese logs indicate no escort losses. The surviving Zeros, under Warrant Officer Yanagiya's command, concentrated on repelling the U.S. planes rather than pressing a full fight. Their core duty, to shield the bombers, had collapsed in disaster. The high-altitude patrol under Mitchell kept watch for reinforcements from Kahili Field, only 20 miles from the ambush site. The anticipated horde of 70 planes never appeared, likely due to total surprise or enemy commitments elsewhere. Mitchell held his edge at 18,000 feet, poised to swoop on any rising challengers. Down below, the strike team wrapped up their hits and headed back. The whole skirmish unfolded in under 10 minutes, with maybe 3 minutes of intense action at the objective. Victory hinged on whether Yamamoto had been aboard the downed bomber. Lieutenant Barber's P-38 showed heavy wear from the fight. It carried 104 perforations from the bomber's 7.7mm Type 92 tailguns and perhaps 0 gunfire. Hydraulics seeped from hit lines, staining the body with red trails. One motor coughed unevenly, likely from sucked-in junk or combat harm, but both Allisons kept running, and the Lightning stayed flyable. Barber started the extended trek home, vigilantly checking engine heat and gas levels. Any odd shudder could herald a breakdown across 400 miles of enemy waters. The journey back challenged each pilot's stamina and expertise. Several planes nursed scant fuel margins. Lieutenant Holmes dealt with motor issues that demanded he throttle back, lagging the group. Radio protocol held up somewhat discipline, held firm among the pilots, resisting any urge to synchronize efforts or seek assistance. Isolated in their cockpits, each one grappled with fuel estimates, pondering if the leftover reserves could get them back to base. The harsh equations of endurance unfolded across all 16 aircraft at once. Nearing the Russell Islands, just about 200 miles from safety, a few aviators confronted tough choices. Lieutenant Hines watched his fuel indicators drop to perilous lows. Instead of gambling on a sea ditching, he might try for the backup runway on Banaka Island. Yet reports of Japanese subs lurking nearby made rescue a long shot. Opting to press on, he relied on his figures and the sturdy Allison power plants. Mitchell's route finding on the way back was just as spot on. The dispersed P-38 slowly regrouped as Guadalcanal came into view. Precisely at 12:30 local time, Fighter Strip 2 loomed up right on schedule. A handful of planes were running on vapors. Holmes touched down with both motors coughing, his tanks virtually empty. The rest made it with under 10 gallons left, barely enough for another 3 minutes aloft. Victory and catastrophe had hinged on mere gallons of fuel. Once the engines quieted, maintenance teams rushed over, tallying bullet strikes and evaluating harm. The burning question hung over them all. Had they pulled it off? Which transport held Yamamoto? The flyers could confirm only 2 bombers downed, though spotting the exact targets amid the chaos had been out of reach. Intel experts had no choice but to gauge the raid's success from Japan's response. The suspense dragged on unbearably. That night, as shadows of the tropics enveloped Guadalcanal, the officers convened in their makeshift club, a crude assembly of reclaimed wood and seized enemy supplies. Captain Lanfear, always alert to the spotlight, wasted no time touting his take on the action. He boasted of nailing Yamamoto's plane with a daring upside-down flip, inverting and blasting the bomber from overhead. Such a tale would demand he'd been everywhere at once, tangling with Zeros and then diving on the transports. Lieutenant Barber countered softly, recounting his direct no-frills dive on the front bomber. The next day, April 19th, Japanese recovery teams located Admiral Yamamoto's downed aircraft. Debris was strewn across thick forest roughly 4 miles from Cape Moer, close to Aku village on Bougainville. Leading the effort was Lieutenant Commander Tabuchi Chagaru from the 26th Air Flotilla. Yamamoto's remains lay ejected from the bulk of the crash, but secured in his seat. Even in fatality, he retained a composed bearing, his gloved right hand gripping the ritual katana. An autopsy by Dr. Tanaka uncovered 2 bullet impacts. One round pierced beneath his left scapula, emerging over his right orbit. A second hit his mandible. Fatality struck instantly, likely on Barber's first salvo. The blow to Japanese naval morale defied measurement. Yamamoto transcended his role as fleet leader. He personified the Navy's heritage and tactical acumen. None rivaled his grasp of integrated fleet tactics. His knack for fostering devotion in ranks was fabled. His sober view of U.S. strengths had alone curbed Tokyo's bolder schemes. Captain Yasuji Watanabe, a surviving aide from the 2nd Transport's wreck who endured grave wounds, would call the Admiral's passing an irreplaceable chasm. The prior evening, Watanabe had shared a shogi game with Yamamoto, noting the commander's unusually resigned demeanor. Japanese naval spies quickly inferred U.S. code cracking. The ambush's accuracy, hitting the precise spot an hour after a 600-mile trek, defied chance. Its occurrence exactly 1 year post-Doolittle pointed to intent, yet confessing, breached ciphers meant owning a ruinous intel lapse that might upend active campaigns. Rather, officials asserted Yamamoto perished overseeing frontline duties, upholding the myth of a standard skirmish over a pinpoint kill. U.S. responses stayed low-key at first, driven by secrecy needs. Japanese verification of code breaches would forfeit the edge that clinched Midway and fueled the Yamamoto strike. FDR took the report with somber approval but mandated total silence. Nimitz fretted that leaks could expose code decryption prowess. For more than a month, civilians in America knew nothing of Yamamoto's demise, much less the American pilots were responsible for his demise. The debate surrounding the identity of Yamamoto's shooter erupted right after the planes touched down and lingered as a toxic rift among the crew for years to come. Captain Lanfear, always attuned to the power of public attention, pushed hard to validate his involvement. His story grew more detailed with each retelling, depicting a daring upside-down loop, flipping belly up and unleashing shots into the bomber's flight path from overhead. Such a sequence would demand that Lanfear defy natural laws, occupying dual positions at once amid stunts beyond the P-38's limits. By contrast, Lieutenant Barber's version stayed grounded and aligned with the available proof. He recounted a direct tail pursuit and strike on the front bomber, then a distinct assault on the trailing one. Post-war interviews with Japanese observers, including Zero fighter pilot Yanaga, corroborated spotting just a single P-38 engaging the lead aircraft from the rear and underneath, precisely matching Barber's description. The entry wounds on Yamamoto's corpse, coming from the lower rear, fit Barber's approach angle flawlessly. The pattern of damage across the debris also pointed to gunfire originating from behind and below, rather than above. This contention simmered on for generations, souring bonds between those involved in the raid. In October 1943, a Time magazine piece highlighted the operation and singled out Lanfear, almost breaching mission confidentiality. Not until 1991 did the Air Force formally award shared credit, half a victory apiece, to Lanfear and Barber, a diplomatic gesture that pleased nobody. Then, in 2003, a thorough review of Japanese documents, debris analysis, and eyewitness accounts led scholars to determine that Barbara solely downed Yamamoto. Major Mitchell, who guided the flight with remarkable expertise, earned the Navy Cross instead of the initially proposed Medal of Honor. High-ranking Navy officials fumed over the leak from early media exposure. All the pilots garnered Navy crosses, honoring the raid's immense risks and significance. Yet Mitchell's masterful piloting, locating a fast-moving objective via 600 miles of pure estimation, merited higher acclaim than bureaucratic rivalries permitted. Insights from Operation Vengeance shaped U.S. fighter evolution for the duration of the conflict. The P-38's blend of endurance, armament, and velocity proved pivotal. No other U.S. plane could have pulled off the strike. Its dual-engine sturdiness saved impaired machines that single-engine types would have forfeited. The focused forward guns delivered rapid, crippling damage unmatched by wing guns. Such takeaways spurred advances in extended-range escorts, including the P-51D Mustang. The Japanese fleet's air arm never bounced back from Yamamoto's elimination. His replacement, Admiral Minichi Koga, fell short of Yamamoto's bold foresight and inspiring command. Koga perished in an aircraft accident barely a year on, in March 1944, yet another setback for Japan's sea forces. Later, Japanese naval efforts showed mounting recklessness over sound planning. The grand clash Yamamoto envisioned, aimed at wiping out U.S. carriers in one stroke, failed to unfold. Rather, their air power eroded away in slaughters like the Marianas Turkey Shoot and the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The fallout rippled far past tactical losses. Propaganda had cast Yamamoto as untouchable, Japan's unmatched sea genius destined to secure triumph. His slaying demolished that illusion. If even Yamamoto could be tracked and eliminated, what hope remained for the empire? Spirits across Japan's armed forces started eroding, snowballing with every loss ahead. The overconfidence from initial wins, dubbed victory disease, yielded to grim resignation. U.S. code-cracking prowess kept delivering key edges across the Pacific campaign. The Japanese downplayed their cipher vulnerabilities, opting for minor tweaks over total overhauls. This oversight exacted a heavy toll, notably at the Philippine Sea, where U.S. planes shredded Japanese carrier-based flyers in the infamous Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Deciphering foe plans turned U.S. defenses into precise traps. Yamamoto's end also weighed on the mission's aviators personally. Lieutenant Raymond Hine vanished on a later sortie, lost without trace. Captain Lanier exited service post-war for ventures in politics and commerce, capitalizing on his contested assertion of felling Yamamoto. Lieutenant Barber stayed. He served in the Air Force, eventually retiring as a colonel in 1961, though his inherent humility kept him from vigorously disputing Lanfair's version of events until his later years, by which time historical records had validated his own perspective. The operation's triumph depended on exceptional collaboration among intelligence agencies, naval leadership, and Army aviators. The Navy cracked the code thanks to efforts by cryptographers such as Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton. Marine Major John Condon contributed early strategic outlines for the raid. Army Air Force aviators carried out the ambush. Such cross-branch teamwork, which was frequently absent in other Pacific campaigns, showed how integrated oversight could yield impressive outcomes. These insights shaped U.S. military strategy for the rest of World War II and beyond into contemporary times. The demise of Admiral Yamamoto went far beyond the mere elimination of a single leader. His distinctive grasp of U.S. strengths offered Japan its sole viable long-term strategy. Among Japanese high command, he stood alone in appreciating America's manufacturing power and resolve. His well-known remark, "I can run wild for 6 months, perhaps a year, but after that I have no confidence," captured his recognition that Japan couldn't sustain an extended conflict. When he was succeeded by officers who prioritized spiritual resolve over tangible resources, Japan's downfall hastened. The date of Yamamoto's passing, April 18, 1943, carried profound meaning. Precisely 1 year following the Doolittle bombing of Tokyo, U.S. aircraft had targeted the core of Japan's armed forces elite. The gesture was deliberate and striking, underscoring America's ability to project force over immense expanses for pinpoint strikes. No enemy general was out of reach. The pursuers had turned into the pursued. This blow sent waves of doubt and indecision through Japan's top brass, undermining their tactical decisions. A close examination of the raid exposed both the advantages and constraints of U.S. fighter tactics. The P-38's endurance was stretched to its breaking point. Multiple planes limped back with fuel tanks nearly empty. If Yamamoto's convoy had lagged by just 30 minutes, the intercepting aircraft could have run out of gas while scanning for the objective. The gap between victory and disaster boiled down to mere liters of fuel and fleeting moments in the air. That narrow escape emphasized the urgency for aircraft with greater reach and improved fuel efficiency. Weather played an indispensable part in the raid's outcome. Crystal-clear conditions at the ambush site enabled spotting the targets from the farthest possible distance. Patchy clouds on the way home offered cover against any pursuing Japanese planes. A single storm brewing anywhere on the path would have scrapped the entire effort. As aviators like to note, the elements had aligned with the Allies on April 18, 1943. Even a minor breeze alteration might have spelled ruin. Japan's attempts to hide Yamamoto's fate betrayed how devastating the blow truly was. For more than a month, official broadcasts still spoke as if he lived. The truth emerged only on May 21, 1943, framed as a death in active combat at the forefront. A national memorial on June 5 drew massive crowds along Tokyo's avenues. Emperor Hirohito's presence marked an extraordinary tribute, highlighting Yamamoto's exceptional standing. Portions of his remains found rest at Tama Cemetery in Tokyo, with the rest at his ancestral shrine in Nagaoka. The U.S. flyers involved grappled with tangled sentiments. They had taken down a formidable foe, one widely regarded as a tactical mastermind. Yamamoto had resisted conflict with the United States, seeing its pointlessness more clearly than his superiors, who compelled his involvement. Still, his role in masterminding Pearl Harbor justified him as a valid objective for vengeance. The ethical dilemmas of deliberate strikes, even during hostilities, haunted certain crew members for years to come. Intelligence specialist Edwin Layton, who had pushed for greenlighting the operation, later pondered Yamamoto's end with ambivalence. He had met the Admiral face-to-face at interwar social gatherings in the 1930s. Layton recognized that Yamamoto's foresight, though threatening to the U.S., stemmed from sober judgment rather than bellicose illusions. At the same time, he realized the Admiral's removal would spare countless American soldiers by derailing Japanese fleet operations. Conflict exacted such grim decisions. The raid showcased U.S. tech dominance across various fronts. Deciphering signals supplied the intel. Extended-range interceptors delivered the firepower. Accurate piloting ensured the execution. Yet raw innovation wasn't enough on its own. The personal elements, Mitchell's directional expertise, Barber's shooting prowess, the ground crew's unwavering commitment, turned potential into actual triumph. The fusion of individual talent and engineering exactness. This operation would define U.S. military dominance across the Pacific theater during World War II. After the war, evaluations uncovered just how precarious the endeavor had been on several occasions. Had Lieutenant Canning missed the enemy group at that crucial moment, the P-38s could have flown right past their objective. Had Barber ceased chasing the plummeting aircraft, Yamamoto might have vanished into the dense foliage. Had Holmes not impaired the other bomber, enabling Barber to finish it off, survivors could have alerted authorities to U.S. code-cracking prowess. Every segment of the sequence endured, yet only by the slimmest of margins. Unit logs laid bare the razor-thin tolerances of the flight in vivid specifics. Records of fuel usage indicated that various planes had pushed past projected limits, pulling it off thanks to helpful breezes and precise motor handling. Reports on ammo use showed Barber unleashing about 70% of his stockpile across his pair of strikes. Repair entries chronicled severe harm to numerous fighters, evidence of the fierce enemy resistance in those fleeting clashes. The demise of Yamamoto carried ramifications far surpassing short-term battlefield outcomes. Without him, Japan lost its sole figure capable of brokering sensible surrender conditions as fortunes shifted unfavorably. Yamamoto grasped that his nation couldn't outlast a drawn-out conflict with America's vast production power. Those who followed, devoid of his insight and sway, adopted ever more reckless approaches that dragged out the fighting and escalated losses for everyone involved. The suicide attacks that arose toward the conflict's close embodied the doctrinal void left by his passing. Meteorological data from April 18, 1943, verified the rare circumstances that made the raid viable. Sightlines stretched over 10 miles for much of the path. Clouds were patchy, not thick blankets. Gusts and bearings aligned neatly with predictions. In the Solomon Islands' usual climate, such ideal setups happened roughly once every 10 days. The sortie had taken off amid a fleeting chance that could have delayed for weeks otherwise. The intel triumph behind Operation Vengeance depended on countless cryptographers, interpreters, and experts laboring in total discretion at Station Hypo and similar outposts. Their role in triumph frequently stayed unsung, eclipsed by prominent frontline actions. Still, absent their diligent, exacting efforts, targeting Yamamoto would have proven unfeasible. The codebreakers supplied the weapon, the aviators simply swung it. Forensic review of the wrecked Betty revealed the lethal impact of focused frontal weaponry. The P-38's 50 caliber guns and 20mm gun formed a lethal overlap roughly 30 inches wide at standard engagement distances. Anything in that area faced certain doom. The aircraft's metal frame lay in tatters, flight wires cut, tanks burst, and occupants slain on the spot. Even heavy plating couldn't withstand that focused barrage. The Zero Guardian's inability to shield the bombers exposed a key flaw in Japanese combat methods. The wingmen followed protocol by tangling with the intruders instead of sticking tight to their charges. This foreseeable tactic let Barber slip through to the heavies, while the ground-based threats distracted the Zeros. U.S. pilots would capitalize on this rigid strategy time and again in later engagements. Admiral Nimitz's choice to greenlight the effort demanded weighing dangers against gains precisely. A botched attempt with significant casualties might have exposed code intercept skills without any payoff. Early news leaks could have prompted a full Japanese cipher overhaul. Nimitz embraced those hazards since Yamamoto stood out as an irreplaceable foe, a leader whose skills defied substitution. Events proved his call sound. The preparation phase showcased U.S. strengths in coordination and execution design. Various options got weighed and rejected. Backup schemes covered potential breakdowns. Climate trends received in-depth scrutiny. Fuel needs got tallied down to the quart. This systematic method, blending deep readiness with adaptable maneuvers, would mark effective U.S. campaigns in the Pacific for the duration. The title Operation Vengeance captured national outrage over Pearl Harbor. However, the airmen involved described minimal personal grudge. They carried out the task with cool efficiency. The wider sense of retribution for the attack fell to higher-ups in strategy and governance. For the flyers, the focus stayed on making it back alive and fulfilling the orders. That sense of fulfillment proved sufficient. The operation showcased the shift in U.S. fighter strategies from mere protection to aggressive assaults. At the outset of the conflict, American aircraft faced challenges in shielding their bombers against Japanese attackers. Yet by April 1943, these fighters were launching intricate strikes far into territory dominated by the enemy. Such a change stemmed from enhanced planes, enhanced pilot preparation, refined maneuvers, and mounting assurance derived from prior triumphs. Operation Vengeance's influence reached far past its direct battlefield effects. It highlighted how personal command could remain vital amid mechanized combat, how accurate intel might facilitate targeted assaults, and how advanced gear alone fell short without the expertise to wield it properly. These insights would echo in later U.S. campaigns, spanning Vietnam through the fight against terrorism. Ultimately, Operation Vengeance epitomized peak American combat prowess, cutting-edge tools directed by sharp reconnaissance, meticulous strategy carried out with adaptable battlefield decisions. Personal prowess integrated into unified group action. The fusion of these factors had taken down Admiral Yamamoto, along with Japan's prime chance for a settlement. The Pacific conflict dragged on for another 28 months, yet its resolution grew certain. On April 18, 1943, 18 U.S. aviators set out on what seemed an unattainable task. The day closed with Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto slain in the Bougainville jungle, Japan's sea power crippled, and triumph in the Pacific looking ever more assured. History's farthest-reaching fighter ambush had succeeded via a blend of ingenious coordination, top-tier equipment, remarkable aerial proficiency, and remarkable fortune. Operation Vengeance fulfilled its title precisely, avenging Pearl Harbor while removing Japan's sharpest strategic thinker. The 16 P-38 Lightnings that made it back to Guadalcanal that day had altered the Pacific War's trajectory. Their crews had pushed the limits of machinery and stamina, engaged in a short yet pivotal clash, and lived to recount it. In those fleeting moments above Bougainville, they accomplished what hordes of bombers and endless rounds of ammunition failed to do: the exact removal of a vital foe commander irreplaceable in loss. The era of deliberate high-level eliminations had arrived, and combat would never quite remain the same.